So just as a little disclaimer, we are fourth year nutrition students pursuing degrees in dietetics. So the information provided is based on just general guidelines from reputable nutrition and medical sources, but it's not intended as medical advice. We advise you to consult a registered dietitian for specific recommendations for your individual needs.
Can you guys hear us from here?
Linda, can you hear us well from here?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yes. She says we can. She can. Yeah, you can hear Matthew as well. Okay.
Yes, I can hear Matthew.
Yes, you're awesome. Thank you.
So first off, we're going to talk about what is protein, and protein is a molecule that is made of amino acids. And it's really different amino acids. So when we have different arrangements of these amino acids, that makes proteins with different structures and functions. And out of these 20 amino acids, there are 9 essential amino acids. And what that means is that these can't be made by our bodies, but they need to be taken in by the diet. And when protein is digested, the protein gets broken down into different amino acids, and those amino acids can be used to make other proteins. It has a lot of different functions. A lot of the times when we think of protein, we just think of building muscle, but there are actually a lot of different things that it does for our bodies. So it can do things like repairing our tissues. It can help with acting as a messenger to transmit signals throughout the body. It can also act as an antibody to fight off infections. And it can transport or store nutrients or act as enzymes to start chemical reactions. And there are also different types of proteins. So there are complete proteins and incomplete proteins. And what a complete protein is that it contains all of the 9 essential amino acids. And incomplete proteins are still proteins, they just don't have all of those essential amino acids. And examples of complete proteins are fish, poultry, eggs, beef, pork, quinoa, tofu, edamame, and nutritional yeast.
So I'll be debunking and talking about just protein myths in general, what people have, what they think about proteins, and just how it relates to like working out, stuff like that. So how much protein is too much? So a normal healthy body, so we have the unlimited capacity to absorb as much protein as we want, but absorb doesn't necessarily mean we're utilizing it for muscle growth. So it's just meaning it's being broken down and taken into the body. And studies have shown that about 20 to 30 grams of protein does the same stimulation of muscle protein synthesis as consuming 90 grams in a single meal. So eating large portions of proteins have shown to increase oxidation of amino acids. So when I say oxidation, I'm meaning we're just burning the amino acids and having an increase of urea production. So urea is just the nitrogen waste that's built up in our body. And then going back, we have just an example. So 3 ounces of chicken, for example, is about 21 grams of protein, and you think of it as a deck of carbs. And then so obviously it's still dependent on the individual. So how much muscle is actually being trained in the age of how much protein you should be consuming. So that can obviously fluctuate. And then the recommendation is to have 25 to 35% of your total calories coming from protein. The 30 to 35% range is on the higher end. And then there's consuming too much and too little over can have adverse effects over time. So when we're talking about long-term effects of having too much protein, that can relate back to the disorder of liver, kidney functions, increased cancer risk, and progression of coronary artery disease. And then if you're not getting enough protein in your diet for a long time, it can affect slow healing for injuries, weakness and fatigue, mood changes, and swelling. And then for those who like exact numbers, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommend that the average individual should consume 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram or 0.36 grams per pound of body weight per day for general health. And then long-term consumption of 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is also safe. And then for the upper limit, it's 3.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 1.6 grams per pound. And then for upper limit, that's like very risky getting that much protein, because at that point you're reaching toxic levels. And again, as I said before, it's very dependent on the individual. So 3.5, it could actually be lower than that depending on the person as well. And then for people who actually want to calculate protein. So let's calculate for someone who weighs 120 pounds and wants to meet the average individual protein of 0.8 grams per kilogram. So let's first convert the body weight into pounds to kilograms. So let's change 120 pounds divided by 2.2. We get 54.54 kilograms. And then we multiply that by 0.8 to get 44 grams of protein needed for a person who weighs 120 pounds. And then I also did the calculations for upper limit, as we talked earlier, for 3.5, that being 190 grams of protein per day. So protein in sports. So to increase muscle mass in combination with physical activity, it's recommended that a person that lifts weights regularly or is trained for a running or cycling event eat an estimated range of 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So with this in mind, you don't necessarily need high amounts of protein just to build muscle. You'll only need a certain range. And again, depending on the individual. So we're saying that maybe if you do want to get into body or into weightlifting, all that, start with the low range and build up depending on your needs. And then should you consume protein before or after workout? So according to the American College of Sports Medicine, consuming protein before workout includes helping to improve recovery and hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is just the muscle size. So just the cells of your muscle and that being growing bigger. Maintaining lean muscle mass, and then working out in an unfed state leads to increase in protein loss. So you're actually losing that synthesis of protein building for muscle. And then after workout, obviously it's greatly affects the skeletal muscle overall. And then making sure to eat within that 3 hour range after training, so it can limit protein synthesis and muscle growth. And then these are all the sources I use for my research. And then Vivian will take over.
Before we get into that, we have a couple of questions we want to address.
Yeah, of course.
I also wanted to ask if you calculated yours and you were surprised by that.
Yeah, I was really surprised.
I think a lot of people become surprised when they see the recommendation and then see maybe how little that is.
Yeah.
I would say that's where I came from. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's so. And is there any recommendation on if it should be incorporated like throughout the day, or because like mine would technically just be one breast of chicken would be all the protein that I technically, according to that calculation, would be 30 grams ish.
Yeah.
So like that just seems to me a lot.
And that's like for a person who's like doing like not a lot of physical activity just to maintain themselves.
Mhm.
Okay.
So obviously if you're working out or like you're moving about every day, you're probably going to need more.
Okay.
But just to maintain yourself, you would only need that much, if that makes sense.
And as for timing, just like any food, if it's a daily recommendation, no matter when you eat it during the day, you're still getting that for your day. So if you just ate it in one meal, you're good to go.
And then also before we move on, someone had a question in the chat. I heard pea protein is also complete protein, and we'll also be discussing complete proteins soon. And with that, we'll be moving on.
So I will talk about meat versus non-meat protein. And let's begin with meat protein. So 1 ounce of meat or fish has about 7 grams of protein, and 1 serving is about 3 ounces. So it has 1 serving of meat has 21 grams of protein. We have 2 types of meat protein, lean meat and non-lean meat, and they differ in their amount of total fat and saturated fat. So you can see that lean meat has less total fat and less saturated fat. And some examples of lean meat are when you read the nutrition labels and when you see that it said loin, sirloin, or round, these are lean meat. And then also that iron steak and beef sirloin are examples of lean meat as well. Some examples of non-lean meat would be something like poultry with skin, fried meat, and bacon. So what are some non-meat protein sources? I divided them into two big categories, eggs and dairy. And dairy includes milk, yogurt, cheese, and butter. And both eggs and dairy are complete proteins, which means they have all the 9 essential amino acids that our body don't need. So now I will go through each type of non-meat protein source and share their interesting nutrition facts with you. So milk is packed with a lot of different nutrients. And the two most important ones that many people tend to lack are calcium and vitamin D. These two nutrients, they work hand in hand to protect our bones and promote bone health. And yogurt is not only a rich source of protein, it has high calcium, phosphorus, and B vitamins. And because they also have probiotics, they can improve our digestive health. Cheese is rich in calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin B12, and they can be incorporated into our meals in many different ways, like melted into pasta, topping a burger, and coating a pizza. And then compared to cheese, butter has slightly less protein and more fat. So it's rich in fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, E, and K. And similar to milk, eggs also have a lot of different vitamins and minerals like vitamin D, folate, and choline. And folate is important in our red blood cell formation, and then choline plays a role in our brain function and development.
Thank you, Vivian. So now we're going to dive a little more into plant protein sources instead of the animal protein sources. And I wanted to begin with this quote I found on the UC Davis Health System website. And it states that animal sources of protein are considered high quality proteins because they contain all the essential amino acids, which Christina was talking about, and are easier for the body to digest and utilize. Most plant sources, on the other hand, do not contain all of the essential amino acids, so it's important to eat a variety of plant proteins every day. Emphasis on variety, which I will get into on how you can do so. So in the nutrition world, this is called protein complementation. So what this means is when looking at some plant protein sources, they have limited amino acids. So that means they either don't have that amino acid that's essential for you, or it's in very small amounts. So what you would do is when you are eating the source that has the limited amino acid, to complement that with a source that is actually high in that amino acid. This way, you're hitting all the boxes for all your essential amino acids, and it's not that hard to do. So when looking at this chart, this is a really good source if you are trying to follow a vegetarian diet, but you're trying to also maintain your essential amino acids through your protein intake. So for example, in the morning, I could have peanut butter, and then at night have some beans. And that's a way I know I would be getting my lysine. Obviously, you might not be thinking about all these complicated names of amino acids. So that's why we just say variety. If you're just going to do one thing, if you're eating plant protein sources, get as much as you'd like and as many types, just so that you know you're getting the essential amino acids. Unlike an egg, if you were just have egg, you know all the amino acids are in there instead of this way. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to play a little game. And what this game is going to entail is I'm going to show one plant protein source and one animal protein source. And we're going to guess which one has more protein based on the serving size that I've indicated. So in the chat, you can type if you think the beans have more protein or if 1 cup of chicken has more protein. And then in person, raise your hand if you think the beans have more protein. Okay, raise your hand if you think the chicken has more protein. Okay, so in person, everyone thinks the chicken. People also think the chicken. Okay, cool. So we're going to reveal the answer. You can keep typing. So the beans actually have more protein than the serving of chicken. So not by a lot, but the beans do have 41 grams, 1 cup of beans, whereas one serving of chicken has 38 grams. So this really shows that, yeah, you can get your protein intake from these plant sources. But like I said, complementing it with other plant sources to get all your essential amino acids. But this is something that I always find shocking. And like most people, you would think the chicken has more protein if it's the same serving size. Okay, we're gonna do it again with nuts and 3 ounces of beef. So raise your hand if you think the beef has more protein. Okay, and we got 2 for the beef and for the nuts. Okay, so now you're on plant protein side. There's also an equal, yes. Okay.
And then in the chat.
And in the chat, most people are guessing beef. So again, it's actually 1 cup of nuts. Little caveat, it sometimes depends on the nut, but generally, if you're just look up how much protein's in nuts, this is what comes up. So it's actually significant. So 5 more grams in a cup of nuts than 3 ounces of beef. And yeah, so again, fooled you with that one, maybe. Not, yeah, like not again. Okay, so now I have 1 cup of pumpkin seeds, which people sometimes don't think seeds have protein or have a lot of protein, but it is a great source of protein. And a half fillet of fish, actually in particular salmon. Okay, so for the nuts, or for the seeds, sorry. He's going with the plant. He's like, I'm not being fooled. And a half a fillet.
Now we're going with the seeds. Pumpkin seeds.
They're going with the seeds.
Yeah.
I think I was like prompting. I was like, the seeds are amazing. So they're actually equal. Oh, Olivia got it. Yeah. You can do it one more time. So a cup of pumpkin seeds has 39 grams of protein, and a half fillet, so that's 178 grams of salmon, has 39 grams of protein as well. So it's kind of crazy to think about. Like if you were to just sit down, eat some pumpkin seeds, and then eat a whole half fillet of salmon, you'd be getting the same amount of protein. Okay, so now we have tofu, which Andy was confused if that had protein before, and yes, it does. 1 cup of tofu versus 1 pork chop. What do we think?
Pork chop.
Pork chop. Okay, we're going pork chop. People are so unsure now. They don't know what to expect. Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
And in the chat, what do you think? Okay.
Tofu.
Equal and tofu.
Equal.
Okay. Time to reveal.
They're almost equal. So the pork chop does have a little more protein. Good job, David. He wins. And the tofu, 1 cup of tofu has 20 grams. So it's still comparable, really. Most of these are really comparable. So yeah. Okay, another fun one. This is 1 hamburger patty versus 1 cup of hummus. Who thinks hummus? Everyone thinks hummus.
Okay. And in the chat, people also think
Hummus.
hummus.
I do love hummus.
So
So the hummus has only 1 gram less, 1 cup of hummus has only 1 gram less than an entire hamburger patty. And hummus, such a good way to get your protein in with your veggies, with any sort of pretzel or something. So this is something that's super easy to get protein from a plant source. Okay, and finally, tahini. So 1 tablespoon versus 1 large egg. Oh, and tahini is sesame butter. Sesame seed butter. So who thinks an egg? Okay. Only 1 tablespoon. You never know. You never know.
I'm sure about that.
No one's sure.
okay.
We think tahini.
Okay, and in the chat, Equal. We're going with egg and equal.
Egg, one, okay.
Okay. So it is kind of maybe what you might think. But only 1 tablespoon is about half of an entire egg. So most butters do have like peanut butter and nut butter, but especially tahini has a lot of protein for like a small amount, if that makes sense. But yeah. Thank you for playing this game, and I hope you might see plant protein sources in a different light.
Yes, so now we're gonna move on to talking about some quick and easy hunger crushing snack ideas. But before we talk about that, I just wanted to mention everyone that's here in person today, all the snacks you had have protein, which just goes to show there's more than just protein bars and protein shakes to get your protein when you're on the go. So what's the hunger crushing combo? The hunger crushing combo was essentially a snack approach created by a Canadian dietitian that entails trying to fit 2 or more hunger crushing components into our snacks. And these components consist of high fiber, protein, and fats. And these are just 3 ideas. So the first idea would be making yogurt, whether it's dairy or non-dairy yogurt, with strawberries and almonds, which carry protein, fiber from the fruit, and then fat from the almonds. And then a second idea would be tomatoes, mozzarella, and olive oil. And a third, and one of my favorite go-to snacks. So this is a snack that's common in Latinx cultures. It would be pan-roasted garbanzo beans, which is a high source of fiber and protein, with olive oil, a great source of fat, and corn on the cob or any other vegetable, which is another great source of fiber. And these are some other hunger crushing combos, and I call these nutty hunger crushing combos. So these can also be made when you're in the rush. And if you do have a nut allergy, you can also substitute peanut butter with sunflower butter. So one of the first ones would be apple with peanut butter and yogurt. Another one would be whole wheat bread with peanut butter and bananas or any of the other fruit you have available. And a third one would be celery with peanut butter and raisins, which a lot of people call ants on the log. And I was not aware of that. That's why I became a nutrition major. And now we're going to be talking about alternative protein sources. So before getting into like the nitty and gritty about what to look for when we're purchasing protein bars, I would just like to mention that a lot of popular protein bars, they consist of either whey or pea concentrates, which aren't as readily utilized in the body as a whole food protein, such as yogurt. So when it's available and when possible, try to choose the whole food option. But we also do understand sometimes we're in a rush, right? A lot of us are college students, full working adults, and we have a lot of responsibility. So when we're looking for a nutritious and convenient source, protein bars are a great source. So now we're gonna dive into what to actually look for, right, in a protein bar. So ideally, we would try to look for a protein bar that has 10 or more grams of protein per bar, 3 or more grams of fiber per bar, and try to aim for a protein bar that has less added sugars. And if you do have any like digestive sensitivities, try to avoid any bars that have sugar alcohol, such as maltitol, because research has shown that it may cause bloating and other issues down the toilet. And then moving on to also plant-based alternatives. So as the world is shifting to consuming more plant-based alternatives for a multitude of reasons, I know it seems very confusing trying to look into what ingredients and what to look for, right, when we're purchasing these new products that a lot of us may not be familiar with. So I wanted to mention a few, and a lot of these plant-based meat alternatives are also a great source of protein. In addition, that they're actually less saturated fat than a normal meat source, and they're also higher in fiber because a lot of these plant-based meat alternatives are made out of vegetables. So in terms of what to look for in these alternatives, one of the first things would be the protein source. And what I mean by protein source is whether the protein source comes from whole foods, as in like beans, because as you can see here in some of the products I presented, like black bean quinoa burgers, they're essentially like veggie burgers, right? While some of the other ones, like the Beyond Meat burger, may have other products that are a little bit more processed and have a little bit less of the whole food variety. And another thing I also wanted to mention in terms of sodium, for a lot of these products, especially like Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger, we do recommend looking at the sodium content, because we want to aim for at least like 2,300 milligrams or less of sodium per day, especially if you might be at risk of high blood pressure or like high cholesterol. And with that, I'm going to be ending my presentation. But before I wanted to end it, I just wanted to mention, I hope this presentation brought some light into different new, I guess, protein snacks, right, that you've never heard of, whether it was tahini, like Sammy mentioned, or like garbanzo beans, green garbanzo beans that aren't as like widely available in a lot of markets. But if you do find them, I totally recommend. They're very tasty. And with that, I'm going to be ending the presentation. Do you have any questions for us?
Can you do some?
Okay. Yes.
Go for it.
So I've always heard that like to better your body digest protein, it should be taken like with a vegetable or a fruit. Is there anything like, is that reliable, or like if I just eat just a source of protein, my body will absorb it just as equally as it would like I think of protein shakes. Sometimes they say like, oh, have a piece of fruit with it, or like mix fruit into your shake as opposed to just the protein powder and water kind of thing. Is there any, if you know? Yeah.
And the reasoning behind that most likely is because those sources, the fruit and the whole ingredients you're talking about, help digestion by themselves. So complementing it with the protein will help you in general with digestion, but it might not enhance that protein's absorption. There could be maybe some science out there that says that certain complementation with absorption, but that we more learn with like vitamins. And as for the macronutrients, I would just say the whole ingredients are doing the aiding in itself. That's why they're saying that.
In addition to your question, I would like to add something that we also do hear about with like plant proteins. One way we've learned in our classes to like increase the bioavailability of plant proteins is to include it with a source of vitamin C. So like strawberries, lemons. Yeah, but that's one of the only ones I could think of as of right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about the protein is the protein might come with iron per se. And so the iron absorption will be increased with an addition of vitamin C source. So that's what I was talking about, like maybe more on the micronutrient level. But as for the protein in itself, it will just, like Matthew said, either be absorbed or not be utilized based on how much and your needs.
And then another question in the chat, is there an ideal protein carb fiber ratio? Which is a really great question. And that's very individualized based on what works for a lot of people. Some people prefer to have a higher like fiber content with like certain snacks. But if you're referring to like just like a plate in general, we like to refer to the balanced plate, which is essentially like 50% of your plate would ideally try to be fruits and vegetables, and then 25% or 35%, right?
Quarter protein and then a quarter carbs with addition of oils. If you ever want to see this balanced plate, let us know. It's a great resource and it's something super easy to understand, and it can give you like general ratios, but like we always say, it is very individualized.
You had it there too, right? Yeah, I had a slide during the recommendation.
You can go back.
For which one? For
Did you
Matthew?
use the one that we used? Did you use the one we used?
No, it's still a balanced plate.
Yeah.
It was a different
I think it was what you said, 37%.
right here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then they also asked, is sedin a complete protein? And sedin is made from soybeans. And soybeans, they're not a complete protein source, right? They're not a complete protein source. Sam, would you like to add on?
Oh, sorry. What are we talking?
For sedin as a complete protein, because it's not a complete protein source.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Christina knows a lot about complete protein sources. We're asking about the seed plant. I've never had it. Wait, what is it made of?
It's made out of soybeans.
Oh,
Usually, yeah, you know how plant proteins.
is it like a form of tofu?
It's like a sister.
The sister.
Can't give you a definitive answer on the topic right now.
Yes.
We'd have to look more into
I
seitan.
would say for the individualized brands, you would have to check that brand's website.
Yeah.
Because a different company that makes seitan a different way could be totally different than the other company. So I would say when in doubt, go to the website source for that company and that'll be.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's just a good rule of thumb for all these alternative protein sources. When you don't know like the exact whole food ingredient it's coming from, refer to their websites. So the next one, I heard beans also have a starch content and it should not be mixed with other carbs if weight loss is preferred. Is this suggestion? It's a pretty loaded question, I'd have to say, because when looking at sources, we always just say, based on your needs, go with the whole food options. So that's our general recommendation. If there's other underlying things people are looking at, that's why we say speak to an actual dietitian or a medical practitioner.
I think the only thing I could think of with that starch content is regarding retaining water weight, maybe, but not necessarily for like weight loss. Just probably maintaining that water weight. That's why I look at that starch content. That's why.
Yeah, I think the focus on the starch is something that if you were to really look into it, maybe it's not the main focus of the question. I think that's all we can really say about that. Does anyone have other questions? I know there's some people that work with a lot of people that in the fitness industry, or questions coming up in that realm about protein or things that could help you have a better understanding.
Yeah, I had a question about you were saying like absorption for like actual being utilized for like muscles. Like how would that affect someone on like a OMAD diet type of situation versus like, or someone who possibly fasts like limited intake amount through the day? They might just have one or two meals. Like would they only be utilizing like a maximum of 30 grams for muscle?
So I actually did more research into that just in case. And with like intermittent fasting, you know, people with that lifestyle, their bodies can adapt to a point where they could maybe not use the full 90 grams, but utilize more than others. It's just like if you're doing it for like a quick fix and like way, then your body's not gonna be able to utilize that. But if it's something like you grew up with, or you're like that is your lifestyle, then your body can adapt for that.
Does anyone in the chat also have any additional questions?
If I don't know where I heard it,
Mhm.
But there's like a thing about having more than 2 eggs. That or can't be that you get more than 2 eggs a day.
I mean, 2 eggs is considered like a serving size. So, I mean, you could consume more eggs, there's no harm in, like, what do you mean by like a lot? More than just,
There's no, like, there's never a like limit. Like, you can only eat 2 eggs or else you're going to whatever. When things are in excess, just like anything, there could be possible consequences. But when we're recommending or knowing like the knowledge behind the egg, we know that egg will get you protein, amino acids, and it will give you energy if you have it during breakfast as well. And so these things are what we're focusing on. And when someone has to possibly care about other parts of the egg, then they should seek guidance in that area. So say like someone has a disease state or something, and the egg is giving them something that in that disease state is not going to help them, then they'll get help. But generally speaking, we're not going to say more than 2 eggs is bad. An egg is a great source, as we're seeing, but I do remember hearing something like that in that 10. So just like anything, there's
too much of anything could be bad, but you're safe to consume 3 eggs.
With like obviously all of you up there have a pretty good grasp of everything. What would you tell your fellow student that I'm sure you hear at the table? What are some things you hear or something that you would tell them to make sure that they're not getting too much into the, I know we push like popularity size and like, that being not necessarily the goal. I'm just interested in what I've heard or had a conversation with students.
right. Just from my own experience in consultations and speaking with fellow students that don't have as much background or the same mindset, especially in living well, and as he's saying, having that mindset of nutrition is, I'd say, pretty maybe unique and has to be fostered. But when speaking to people, we always try to get it more into what is that food actually doing for you, and what are the nutritional benefits, like the actual facts of what that food is providing for you throughout your day, and does that meet your needs, and is that something you enjoy? So we always try to lead them down that path. And sometimes people go in with very narrow mindset of there's one problem in this one food and they're very fixated, and that's okay. We just go where they're at and see why they have that mindset, and really trying to just open them up to food is to be enjoyed, and it can give you these certain benefits. It's your choice of what you want to eat. So that's like how we try to go about things.
I will say I did really like the comparison to the deck of cards, because that's something for me, like in college, like being athletes and going through, it's something that I found I would get caught up in was like weight and feeling like I need to weigh everything that I was in, and I got like fell down that path. So having little like visual of like, okay, shoot for it to be about the size of your fist or a deck of cards or things like that. So I really liked that you guys had that.
Totally. Yeah, there's always numbers out there and there's always these recommendations, but when it comes down to it, this person is an individual, and we really try to foster that. It's different for everyone.
Great presentation.
Thank you. Did you have another question?
Oh no, I'm just gonna add an egg thing. I think that. Sorry, I think it comes. I just wanted to add like context to the question. Like, I think that comes up from like dietary cholesterol intake, like daily diet recommendations, was where that 2 number comes from.
Definitely. We try not to like allude to those things too much, just because if someone has to think about that, there's probably a reason. So we're not going to put that into their minds, if that makes sense. I think that's where we've been trained and how we see food. And so, but yeah, it's really good to have these conversations because things do pop up no matter what.
There's one more question.
Do you want me to-
Yeah. So the other question, if we need to incorporate more protein in their into their daily diet, but they can only increase during one meal, then is it worth it to increase their protein intake in that one meal past 30 grams? I think this question is directed towards Matthews.
Again, I talked about those three factors. So how much muscle you're actually being trained, age, obviously as we get older, we're gonna need more, and the size of the individual. So I know from like a person who weighs 120 pounds could probably only utilize 23 grams, but someone who weighs like 160 can utilize 33. So I would necessarily say try it if you need to. You can try past 30 grams, and if it's working for you, definitely yes. If not, then you can cut back. It's the best thing I can say for that. Are we doing giveaways, Bailey? Are we doing giveaways? Okay.
There's one.
So I am going to take professional staff out of the way, so sorry. How do you want to decide it?
So we're doing 1 Zoom. Okay. Pick a number. So there's 3 of you. 1/3 chance of winning. I'm picking a number between oh god, please don't say all the same number. 1 and 10.
I was
We'll
gonna
go
type it
left to right.
in the chat. Are we doing the same thing?
4.
Just pick one. Okay.
My number was 7. So,
Yeah. You win a gift card.
Congrats.
And you get as many snacks as you like.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
we're not doing
And if you have more in-depth questions, you can definitely come to our consultations or just to us individually for these presentations. We don't want to go like too in-depth, I'd say, with some things. So that's maybe why we're like generally, if that makes sense.
And feel free to have some snacks.
Vivian, you make sense to your twin.